we're going to control exposure here. The exposure obviously makes your image lighter or darker. And we're gonna come with an overall best exposure for her skin. Okay, so just focus on this part here, and we're gonna control it so that it's just right. By the way, as you notice, the image is overexposed. It was like this originally. It's too bright. And even though I was shooting in manual mode on my camera, somehow I still managed to overexpose. So this is why it's important to shoot in RAW so that you can later adjust this. So we're gonna go down on exposure to say somewhere over there. So now I like the way her skin is lit. It's not too bright or too dark. Maybe just a tiny bit darker, maybe right there. So first we focus on just one part of the image here, and then I basically ignore all of this and all of these other ones. Just ignore all of that, and I simply open the image. So we got one here. Then I go back and I open this image again. Okay, I open this image again, and now you want to see where in the image the exposure is still off. It's not well exposed, and you expose for that part of the image. So the first thing that pops out to me is her hand. See how her hand here is brighter than her skin here on her face? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now look at this part of the image, and I'm going to expose it correctly like that. So yes, although everything else is too dark, all I care for is right here is her hand. So I'm going to expose it like that. I'm going to click Open Image. And then I'm going to do the following. I'm going to select this image. I'm going to select all. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to close it. And then I'm going to paste it onto here. So right now we have one layer. We're going to call this layer here, let's call it, by the way, I just double clicked on the layer and it popped out this window. We're going to call it her skin, her face. Okay. That layer is now called her face. Then we're going to paste the image we copied a second ago on top. You can see there's a layer here on top now. We're going to call this one her hand. Once again, to rename, you can just double click on it like that, like that, like that. Okay, so now we have two layers right there. You can unclick. Now we're going to open this image again, and now we're going to adjust for his skin. Okay, so just focus on his skin. Look at his. Okay, that seems correct, more or less. Again, we're gonna select this image, copy, close, and paste. Okay, and we're gonna rename this one his face. Alright, now we're gonna do another conversion for his shirt here, and you can see it's overexposed, so we want to try to see if we can save any of it. So if we go down dark enough, you can see that it was so bright in the beginning that we're not able to bring it back the detail. So we're just gonna ignore this for now. We'll try to fix it later in actual Photoshop. But instead we're gonna look at her hair, because as you can see, if we're here, her hair is too dark. It can see, and you can almost see no detail in much of her hair. So we do want detail in her hair. So we're gonna bring it up to say over here, so that even though this part doesn't look that great, it looks too bright. I want to see some detail here. So we're gonna bring it up maybe to there. Now we're gonna open this image. We're gonna do what we did before. We're gonna select all. We're gonna copy. We're gonna close, and we're going to paste. Okay, now we have this image here, this layer. We're gonna call it her hair, and I think that's enough. Usually I don't convert 4, I'm typically at 3 or 2, but if I really care about an image, I might convert as many as 7. And you convert again for different parts of the image, so that here if we go into full screen mode by pressing F, we uncheck so we can't see some of them. You can see that this one is her face, that's her hand, that's his face, her hair. Okay, so we have differently exposed layers here. And now what we're gonna do is combine them. Now to combine them, I have to show you something first. We're gonna open an image here of this awesome little boy. What I'm gonna talk about next is layer masks. Layer masks are really important. I literally use them on almost every step of my process, so please pay attention because throughout this video you'll see a lot of layer masks. To start though, let me talk a little bit about image adjustments. Whenever people start using Photoshop and they want to adjust something to the image, what they do is they go to this menu here, Image Adjustments, and they pick one of these tools. For instance, let's say I wanted to make the image black and white. I would go to Saturation and Unsaturated and click OK. So now my image is black and white, but the problem is the fact that I made a permanent change to my layer. So here you can see that it's black and white, and if I wanted to go back, I wouldn't be able to because I just permanently changed this layer. So what do I do in this situation? Well, most people do the following. They undo this, then they duplicate the layer, and let's say they call it black and white. And then now I have two copies. What I do is I go do the same thing. I unsaturate the layer. And then I have one copy on top, one copy on the bottom. So now if I wanted to go back, if I made a mistake, I could always disable this layer here and I would see what's underneath. Let's say also that our project was to make the whole image black and white, but to make the shirt colorful. Most people would do this first. They would copy the layer and then make it black and white, and then they would use the eraser tool to delete this part of the image. Because if they delete this part of the layer, this black and white layer, whatever is underneath is going to show, and what's underneath is the colorful layer. So if we delete this part of the black and white layer, the colorful one underneath is going to show, and the shirt will become colorful while the rest of the image is not. And if we disable this colorful image, we'll see that all we did was made a hole in the black and white layer. The problem, of course, is that if you made a mistake, like here, let's say you didn't want to color this part of the arm here, there is no way to get the black and white onto here, this part of the arm, because we deleted permanently this layer here. So it seems it would be very useful if we had a way to get back this deleted part. Well, there is, but instead of deleting the image, we're going to do something different. We're going to go back in history, and now we have our image, our layer completely whole. It's not deleted in any way. And what we're going to do, instead of using the eraser tool, we're going to apply a mask to it. To apply a mask, you simply select the layer and you click on this icon right here, and this applies a mask to this layer. You can see on the right, now we have this white space, this icon. That means there is a mask on this layer. And this is how masks work. If the mask is white, then it is showing that layer. So we have white everywhere, therefore the layer is shown everywhere. Now, if we paint it black, if we paint the mask black, then it is going to hide that layer. So let's take a bucket, let's take black, and let's select the mask by clicking on it, and let's paint it black. Now, everything is black on the mask, and therefore everything is hidden. So we're not seeing any of this layer right here, but we're seeing what's underneath, which is the colorful layer. What's awesome about mask is the fact that you can choose white and you can paint it back with white, and now you're showing the layer again. And then you can paint it black again, and then you're gonna hide the layer again, and you'll see what's underneath. What's cool though about the masks is the fact that you can paint them with a brush, and you can paint only a part of it instead of the whole thing. So what we're gonna do is we're going to paint part of this mask in black, and wherever we're gonna paint black, that part of the layer is going to be hidden, and whatever is underneath is gonna show, which is the colorful part. So we're painting with black. We have a brush at 100 opacity, and we're gonna paint right there. Okay? So now see here on the mask, you'll see that part of it is black and part of it is white. The part that's black, again, is hidden, or you could say deleted. That part is deleted or hidden. The part that's white is showing. So this part, the black and white part, is showing, and this part is not showing, so you see whatever is underneath, which is the colorful part. If we disable this layer here, you'll see that we also have a hole like we did before, but this time we can bring back the black and whiteness layer by choosing white, which is to show that layer. So we're gonna paint back part of this black and white layer. So we can paint it back, and as you can see, when I'm painting with white on the mask, it's bringing back that layer. See, it's bringing it back. So if we enable the underneath layer, the colorful layer, we're gonna see that. Okay? So let's make the shirt colorful by hiding the black and white layer by painting black on the mask. And now, if we had this problem here like we did before, see how, again, we don't want this part of the arm in color, we want to make it black and white. Since the masks are not permanent, you can change them from white to black anytime you want. Now we can solve this problem a lot easier. We're gonna take a brush, and then we're going to show the black and white layer by painting with white. So we'll make our brush smaller, and then we're just gonna paint it very carefully this time. Something like that. And let's say that we weren't happy with the fact that part of the shirt is black and white. Again, since masks are not permanent, you can now paint that black and you'll hide this black and white part. So let's do that and hide the edges. There we go. Hide the edges. Something like that. Okay? So once again, the black part is hidden, the white is showing, and you can paint the mask part of it black, part of it white. What's cool too is that you don't have to always be painting with pure black and pure white. You can be painting with gray. Let's say that we pick a gray that's right in between of white and black. So basically, if you paint with this, it'll show the layer halfway. Make our brush bigger, and if we paint, it'll be colorful halfway because we're painting with gray that's right in between of white and black. And again, it's not permanent because it's a mask. You could also do is if you choose black, you can simply paint with a lower opacity. So you can choose opacity that's say 50%. And when you paint, let's say we paint the background with black at 50%, it's gonna basically paint with gray, as you can see here on the layer mask, because black at 50% becomes gray. You can also paint at 10%. Well, first let's make everything at 100% white, so we're showing the effect because we're made a mess here. So let's paint everything. We're gonna paint everything with white to show the black and white effect, and then we can paint black with, let's say, 15% or 14%, something really small. So now if we paint with black at 15% or 14, it's going to be very, very, very light gray that we're painting with. So the layer will be slightly hidden, and if we uncheck this layer here in the bottom, you'll see that it's basically partially showing through, very, very slightly. Okay? So again, the masks are important because it allows us to make adjustments that aren't permanent and allow us to go back and forth between white and black, and we're not making any permanent adjustments. Before we go on, let me tell you a little bit about the options on the brush. So let's first make this 100, and let's paint everything with white again to make this black and white. Oops, with white to make this black and white. Alright, and what we're gonna do is we're going to show you differences in brushes. If you take black and you right click, you'll see that there's this option of hardness. Let me show you what this is. If we have hardness at 0, then if we paint, it's going to make the edges of the brush really soft. See how the transition between the black and white and the color is really, really soft? Well, if we make the brush 100% hard, then when we paint, the transition is going to be very, very, very sharp. See how the difference in transitions are? Here it's very soft, here it's very, very sharp. This is important because sometimes when you're going around an edge, you want a softer edge, and sometimes you want a harder edge. For instance, let's say you wanted to make his eyes black and white or colorful. On the edges, it would probably make sense to have a more hard edge, while if you're making something like the shirt, since the shirt edge is not very hard, you'd probably want a softer brush. So keep this in mind because sometimes this is important. And now let's go back to the discussion about the adjusting of the images. We're going to delete this black and white here. And I'm going to show you something else. Instead of duplicating the layer and making it a permanent adjustment on it, what you could do is you could simply make an adjustment by going here to this menu and picking, say, saturation, and then what you'll see is it made a separate layer. So this is an adjustment layer. It doesn't change the layer itself, but it adds a separate layer that only is responsible for adjusting whatever is underneath it. So if we go to adjustments and say unsaturate, we didn't make any permanent changes to this layer because we can disable the saturation layer. Okay. This is useful once again because you're not messing with the original layer, you're just making adjustments that aren't permanent and that can be turned off anytime you want. And what's cool about them is that they come with a mask right away, so you can select certain parts of the effect to be hidden. So once again, to hide, we choose black. We'll just do 100% and we'll paint on the mask of this effect. So if we paint, you'll see that part of this effect is hidden. What's the effect? Well, the effect is unsaturation. Let's call this black and white. So we're hiding part of the black and white effect. So now the white part is showing here, and the black part is not. And you can make all sorts of adjustments. For instance, if you chose contrast, and you made this very contrasty, you can adjust the mask of this effect as well. For instance, let's say that you didn't want his t-shirt to be so bright. So you could paint with black. Let's make a softer edge. And you can paint to hide this contrast effect. Okay, you hide that. And now the bottom part of this effect is not showing. So the bottom part is the same and the top part is more contrasty. You can see that if we uncheck this here, see, only the top part is changing. So I use this method a lot, but I don't use it in such an obvious way. What I typically would do would be something like this. Let's say that I thought his chin was too dark. Then I would go to something, let's say like brightness. I would make the whole picture more bright, everything more bright, like that. And then I would go back and I would paint this whole effect black to hide everything. And then I would return to the chin and I would paint back with white only this part here, only the chin. Okay? And I wouldn't do it at something like 100% because it would be too obvious. Here, let me show you. If I do paint at 100%, you'll see that everything is way too obvious. So I'm gonna undo, and I would paint at something like 10%. Okay, so it barely shows that effect. So I would be very careful, and I would paint with white to show this brightness effect under the chin. I would be very careful so that everything is nice and neat. And then if we go back and see what we did by enabling and disabling this effect, you'll see that I made the chin a little lighter, but the change is very subtle. So this method I use a lot, and you will see the way I use this method a lot. So now let's go back to our image and see how this applies over there. Here is a situation where we're trying to combine four images into one, and parts of the image need to be shown from this layer, parts are from this layer, and so forth. So this is how we do it. We're going to first apply a mask to the top three layers. We're going to not touch the bottom, but we're going to apply masks to these three. So we're just going to click, click, and click. So now we got masks. Like I said, they're white, so they're all showing. So we want to hide all of them. So we're going to create select black and hide this one, that one, and that one. So now, since these are hidden, all we're seeing is her face. Okay? So now we're going to select a brush. We're going to paint in whatever parts of the image that we are concerned about. So first we're going to paint in her hand. So we're going to zoom in, and we're going to take the brush, and we're going to, by the way, I'm going to use a few shortcuts for myself, like E and R, to make my brush bigger and smaller. So whenever you see this happening, imagine that I'm pressing E and R. Like I said, typically it's the bracket tool, but since ER is closer to my left hand, I use ER. I change the settings in Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts there. Okay, so that's what happens when you see this. When you see this, when I'm changing to my hand, what I'm doing is I'm pressing the space button and holding it, and that way I can move things around. And when I press S for me, I think the standard is Z, I changed it to S, I changed it to the zoom tool so I can zoom in and out. So you'll see a lot of that. So we're gonna go to my brush. By the way, to select my brush, I press G, which is useful. That way S, G, spacebar are all there, and I can switch between all of them very quickly instead of going here, which takes more time. Anyways, back to the hand. We're trying to paint in the hand with white. We're gonna choose our brush, and we're gonna use opacity. I'm gonna go with 50% so that it's not as strong. We can do a better job. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna paint in. You can see it's getting darker. We're gonna be very careful. I'm gonna click a few times. So it's, yep, just like that. Alright, so if we go back, see how it became darker? Again, all that happened is I used this layer and painted with a mask to make this hand darker. Again, all I did was I use this layer, put a mask on it, hid the layer, and then only now I'm showing just the hand part. Okay, so we zoom out, and that looks pretty even though I know the coloring is different, but that's okay for now. Then we have his face. We take the brush, make it bigger, and paint with white over his face, which actually I believe is the same brightness as her face, so we're not actually doing anything um, useful here. But what we do wanna fix is a little bit of his color. Here, the shirt, we're gonna go onto the layer that's her hand. Since her hand is darker and we want the shirt darker, we're just gonna use this layer here, even though it wasn't designed specifically for his shirt. So we're gonna paint with white, so we're gonna make this a little darker. It's not gonna be perfect, but it's gonna be a little better. Maybe there a little bit. Okay. So as you can see, that made it a little darker. Okay, then we zoom out. Then we got her hair. Well, her hair is fine here, but it's a little, you can probably use a little brighter here. So we're gonna paint with white here. It's not, oops, that's too much, so we're gonna actually use a weaker brush, 20%, and we're gonna paint back with black to not show the uh, brighter hair. So we just want to go through this and be very careful about brightening some of the spots, but not everything. Okay, something like that. Alright, I think that's enough. Now another thing is this here is a little too bright. It's it seems like there's almost no hair there, which we'll have to correct later. Like I've said before, sometimes the cameras capture things not as they actually were. So this is definitely not something I remember it, but somehow the camera captured it in a way that now doesn't look as good. Okay, now this image looks pretty even. More or less, it looks pretty good. The goal of this phase here is to even the image out as much as you can. The reason for that is later we're going to be increasing contrast. So if you have some brightness problems with some parts of the image, then it's going to become even worse later. For instance, if we started out with this, right, and her hand was too bright, later if we increase contrast, actually let me show you right away. Let me add a contrast tool. If we increase contrast, then as you can see, her hand is becoming way, way, way too bright, and that same is for his shirt. And as you can see, her hair is becoming way too dark, where you can't see any detail here. So the reason that we're evening the light out is because we do want to increase contrast later, because when you increase contrast, pictures look a lot more bright and colorful and interesting. But if you increase contrast with uneven lighting, then every problem that exists on the image is going to become even worse.